Welcome to Community Crypto on CoinDesk TV. I'm your host, Isaiah Jackson, and this week we are discussing how digitizing the dollar can address financial inclusion. I'm joined by Carmelle Cadet, founder and CEO of MTech Incorporated. MTech is a US-based financial technology company helping Central Bank Digital Currencies, also known as CBDCs, modernize with technologies like blockchain, cloud computing, and data analytics in order to close inclusion gaps. Welcome to the show, Carmelle.
Thank you very much, Zay. Thank you.
Oh yeah, glad to have you on. Long time coming. And, recently you testified before the U.S. House Committee on Financial Services. So let's take a look at the clip of your testimonial.
It is my pleasure to talk to you today about how a central bank digital currency, specifically a digital version of the paper cash that we know today, can be used for financial inclusion by design, make peer-to-peer payments resilient, lower cost of payment, and enhance user privacy. This conversation is very important to me personally, given my experience as a once unbanked minority person in the US, as a Haitian immigrant supported by a single mom, hi mom, who was paid below minimum wage. I learned firsthand the importance of accessing the financial sector.
Yes, so a great clip there. And you mentioned in the clip, being an unbanked immigrant. So I do want to start with, tell us a bit about your background and, why you're doing what you're doing.
Sure. So I'm originally from Haiti, as I mentioned, and going from Haiti to the U.S. is an experience when it comes to financial access, because in the Haiti, although you have the concept of banks, but growing up, it's a very cash-based economy. The main thing that we worry about, that I remember my mom worrying about, was the FX, the dollar exchange rate all the time, because it's either you were buying dollars or you were selling dollars, but you're all cash, and you're relying on people either sending you money, or you barely get paid, or people need to pay you, and sometimes they pay you in US, sometimes they pay you in local currency, and that has gotten worse since then. So I remember when I moved to the US, we were political exiles, by the way. We left because my family was in politics, and it was a really difficult time. We had to leave. My mom couldn't work anymore. So we fled, and when we got to the U.S., we didn't have the paperwork for us to have an account in the U.S. So we were cash-based for a good period of time. And even when you do get into the banking system, I paid way too many NSF fees that I care to admit in the banking system, because you're just living paycheck to paycheck, and it's very expensive to not have money. It's very expensive to be cash based. If you need to buy something, if you need to pay something, it's either you have to wait for the person, you have to get in the car, burn gas, go get the money, or pay Western Union to send money, which my mom still does today, now that we send back money back home. So wow. It's just the whole system, like once you go through it, you have an appreciation for it. But then I was lucky enough somebody told me about an internship program. I went, got a job, ended up becoming a typical kind of embedded into the American culture, getting credit cards, bought a house, and, and have a car payment and all that, just the American dream, right? But it shows you the transition from being a cash-based, unbanked person and the cost structure around that compared to the cost structure that I have today. And in a way, it's kind of backwards, if you ask me, right? Because I could probably afford to pay more fees now than when I was just first starting out.
Oh yeah, and you mentioned that very important. It's expensive to be poor. I think a lot of people don't understand that. It's very expensive to be poor. So many fees and things attached to trying to get your money. So explain to us exactly how MTech can maybe solve that problem and help with financial inclusion.
Sure. So I had a journey to blockchain and to Bitcoin, and I don't think I've ever told you this story, but I deep dive in blockchain and Bitcoin while I was on maternity leave. And I used to watch your YouTube videos all the time. And as I was learning about Bitcoin, and it was just, what was it? It was just crypto and with two black guys talking about this stuff that I had no idea about. And I remember telling my husband, I'm like, there are black people talking about this. But, it was just a conversation at the time that was very important. And as I was really learning about it, and by the way, thank you for that, because you were early on setting up, trying to educate, trying to tell people how to think through it. I remember the volatility was crazy at the time. The regulation was kind of coming out. It's like one day this, one day is that. And then, people were trying to figure out what to do with it. But look, I went back into the blockchain space. I went back to IBM after my maternity leave and then started working on a cross-border solution with blockchain. I've always been on the journey to solve financial inclusion. Even working at IBM, I've been working, looking at mobile money, emerging markets. How do we learn from Africa? Africa has so much innovation into the financial inclusion and mobile money space. That was always of interest to me as far as how do we learn from that to bring it back and use that in Haiti. And then stumble upon the fact that there are so many layers to the financial market infrastructure today that is very complicated. And every app that comes out that talks about financial inclusion is great. It's going to service a different market, but the cost of payment kept going up anyway. And then, you have a concept of Bitcoin where when I finally set up my wallet, I said, wow, I get it. This is something that does not care, did not ask me how much money I had in the bank, did not ask me for my race, did not ask me where I live, did not care about anything about me, is whether I could figure out how to set up a wallet and then set up my private key. That's all I had to figure out. So I got interested in it. As we were looking at the landscape, we realized that the infrastructure was not ready for this in a way.
Yes.
Right? And how do we get now to the infrastructure level? Because the regulators did not understand what was happening. And we kept talking to regulators. I worked on a project. After 2 years, it died because the regulator did not understand what a stable coin was or did not understand how to regulate it. Millions of dollars later to waste. So that's when I had a light bulb moment. We've been talking about financial inclusion in the context of how can we get the unbanked with a bank account. And last year, in the middle of a stimulus, the Senate introduced a bill that talked about Fed wallets and Fed accounts and mandating the banks to give people who don't have a bank account a bank account. And I said, that's never going to happen. The commercial, the financial, the business model does not support that. So why would the banks do this? So instead, with blockchain, the central bank already has an asset that's inclusive, and that's cash. It is decentralized by nature, and I say this, and I know sometimes the Bitcoin boys don't like me when I say this, but it is the most decentralized asset there is cash, and Bitcoin was trying to emulate cash, and it's already adopted, it's already trusted. We might not like the issuer. And I think we can say that for many issuers in the DeFi space, we might we might have beef with the issuer itself, but it is an asset that people trust. If we took it, instead of leaving it paper-based, we put it on a mechanism of programmable money and allow a self-governing mechanism like blockchain and distributed ledger to govern it, can the central bank provide financial inclusion with that? That was the start of, we need to go work with the central banks because we think we can solve financial inclusion by design.
Oh yeah, and around that time, it's funny. I actually wrote a letter to the committee about that to say that, hey, if we're going to do stimulus checks, why don't we do airdrops, much like we have in the crypto world, where that you won't have to get a paper check that's signed by the president. That's so outdated. So I'm with you there as far as trying to push a digital dollar. Because I mean, if you want to get it to everybody, you have to be able to get it to everybody. So I love that you mentioned that. And, we mentioned central bank digital currencies. How can CBDCs solve problems that cryptocurrencies cannot? Is it, the lack of volatility? Is it a more stable way to pay? What are some of the things that give it an advantage over cryptocurrencies?
I think you could think about the onboarding and the learning curve that a typical user would need to go through to set up a Bitcoin wallet, for example. And those are getting easier. It's getting easier now. I talk to my girlfriends that are not in this kind of setting up an account and getting Bitcoin. You'd be proud of me. You can kind of walk through that, but it's the asset type that's interesting to me, because the conversation sometimes goes into, is central bank digital currency going to kill Bitcoin? And for me, the answer is clearly no, because you have in financial market infrastructure, you want resilience, you don't want concentration, you want competition, not only at the player level, meaning banks, fintechs, and everybody else, but you also want that on an asset level for diversification. People don't have an appreciation for this sometimes, but if you were trading in the GameStop rally, at some point, if you were smart, you wanted to cash out, and you probably cashed out into cash, into your bank deposits, right? Mm-hmm. So it's because you want to be able to do market making and mitigate your risk and have a diversified approach to financial inclusion, to financial management. And for me, CBDC is just that riskless, trusted, not going to go up and give you a bunch of money. It's not particularly wealth building per se. Bitcoin has the characteristics and different characteristics that makes it interesting for wealth building, and there's a different risk profile. But because of that, you need something that's stable, something that, at the end of the day, whether you want it or not, you have access to a digital asset that just does what cash does for you. And then the same way you do stocks and bonds, and you do mutual funds, and you do Bitcoin, you could do CBDC, Bitcoin, mutual funds, bond, stocks.
Oh, yeah. So you agree they'll work alongside each other, much like what I've said on the show before. The competition is good. Like you said, it gives people options. But how far away are we, do you think, from a U.S.-based CBDC? Do you think we're close, or do you think it'll be pushed back a little bit?
This is the $15 trillion question. I think if you... I've been in this for 2 years, right? I mean, at least in MTech, and 2 more years before that. 2 years ago, no one believed us that this was going to be a thing. Africa, let alone the US. I remember being in Ghana talking about blockchain in 2018, and I almost got booed out of the room. It was just one of those things like, this is not going to happen, and this is never going, but then 2 weeks ago, I'm sitting in the airport heading to Abuja, and then the governor of Central Bank Nigeria, after taking pretty strong stance on crypto, says, "Look, we're going to do this."
Yep.
Not knowing, and things change. I say this to say things change. We testified in Congress this year. It was almost a year to the date when we published our working paper that talked about the same. The U.S. needs a digital cash infrastructure to address the problems that we have specifically experiencing during the stimulus right now. And it's funny, my team and I were kind of going through and having, we should post that for Throwback Thursday on projectnewdawn.info, where we kind of created a landing page to say, here's what's going to happen. Millions of people are not going to get stimulus. Stimulus is going to go out, and a lot of people are going to get it, and then millions are going to be left out. And sure enough, that's what happened. So a year later, here we are testifying. At the time, people were saying, there's no way, the U.S. is not going to do this. They're so far off. But I think the congressional approach to it is probably what shifted, and then it's post-COVID conversation. The U.S. never really particularly looked at financial inclusion as a problem, not understanding the impact of high cost fees and what it does for a low income family, and not having that understanding kind of puts it gives you a blind spot on what is the opportunity here on modernizing your payment infrastructure for it to address certain pain points. for lower income family, for government benefits distribution, for payroll, instead of doing checks. Most other countries don't do checks. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a check outside of the US.
Wow.
Right? I mean, that concept just doesn't exist in Europe, for example, right? So you kind of have to have a conversation and say, that brought it forward. It brought a use case forward for the US to start thinking, and that's why you're seeing the acceleration now. But I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's hard to say when, but I think now there's a true use case to gravitate around, and I think with congressional push and support, you might see a move there.
Oh yeah, and I think the competition from China may help as well. With the digital yuan being revealed, I believe they're starting trials now, and they'll start, distributing next year. So maybe that competition will push the U.S. forward. Nothing makes us move, more than competition. So, I think we'll get there sometime soon. Because you're right. I mean, just a year ago it was laughable, and then now we're sitting here discussing it as a possibility. So great to see that progress. But I mean, it's always regulations in the way. Takes a little time, but there's a few concerns. I'll play devil's advocate here with CBDCs. One of the things being privacy. Do you believe that citizens will have less privacy? Do you think it'll be more surveillance with CBDCs, or is there a solution to make it private, much like cash is today?
I refer, even as Moni earlier last week, I referred to cash, the cash characteristics, privacy, and almost not anonymity, pseudo-anonymity. If you are outside of a cash transaction, you don't know how much was exchanged. You don't know who paid who. Only the parties that are part of a transaction are aware, and you settle in real time. So it's a very private component of cash that is worth maintaining. I am a big believer in privacy. We, as technology builders in this space, we feel like we have a responsibility to drive and understand those requirements. And that's why officially in the test, even in a written testimony, when we says, this should not be seen as a tool to track and trace people. This should not be a tool to spy on people. And I think maybe it is a good thing that you're seeing the world, in dismay of what China is doing. Maybe that's good, right? At least we see where the compass is and saying, okay, we all have identified a model of what not to follow. And so that's good. So let's take that. And how do we actually take the privacy rights, especially in the US, and I like the idea of codifying them and making sure that you use blockchain to enhance the privacy rights that are supposed to be extended today, and make it an embedded governance mechanism where you provide privacy to the user, and transparently communicate and say why you also need a mechanism to ensure that this is not going to be a money laundering technology or platform. There needs to be a balance. It's the honest conversation that we have to have too, because the moment you say, okay, we're going to give full privacy to everybody, the 0.01% of the world that does this stuff is going to come and make it 0.2%, right? And at the end of the day, we have a motivation, we have a reason to push for guardrails and parameters to prevent money laundering, but also fight for privacy rights to be embedded as part of that. And if you do need to open and unlock and get people's information like they do today, that can be done in a very structured and legal way. And the context of blockchain can make that very transparent.
Oh yeah, and I'm with you there. It's sort of the balance between both. You want privacy, but you also don't want criminals to use it. It's a very tough thing to solve. But with CBDCs, like you said, the ability to digitize the dollar, to make sure it's given to people and that they can use it, is far more important than I think our worries about money laundering. Because I would love to see a private wallet for citizens, but public for our government agencies, that would be great. But again, there's a lot of red tape in between, like you just said, to get that going.
Interesting. So, taking down the requirements, Zay.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, we have the opposite right now. It's like our governments are doing stuff we don't even know about, but everything we do is public. You know, they can find it. So hopefully that can flip it on its head. Absolutely. And I wanted to ask too about nation states adopting CBDCs. What countries do you see maybe being the first to do it outside of China? What other countries do you see being the first to adopt CBDCs?
Hey, so we're going to talk about that. Central Bank of Bahamas currently has a live CBDC running.
Yep, the same
Bahamas does. And I know it's a small country, but this is, I always say it's like Bahamas was the first to do it, to go live. and you know why this is important? Because it wasn't popular back then. I think people don't have an appreciation for how much courage it took for such a conservative, small country in the Caribbean to stand up and say, we're going to do this because we need it.
Right.
The banking sector in the Bahamas is very difficult. It's very expensive. Financial inclusion is a problem. And the central bank felt that they needed to do that. And it was a multi-year process for them. But I was impressed, even from the RFP that they posted when they were thinking about this. You can tell that it was thought through. They were smart. They knew what they wanted, at least at a high level. They were not technologists, and they selected a really good partner to help them do that. But it is the first country that stepped up and did it. The other countries have learned from it. I call it the POC watch around the world, because it is something that it has value. It created a retail CBDC to show how that can be done, that the central bank can issue. Imagine a central bank app that you can download on, from the Apple Store. It was a very interesting protocol and solution to bring to market. But for the other countries, I think you're seeing the Caribbean taking the lead. I think that's worth saying, because now the Eastern Caribbean also announced their CBDC. Jamaica announced theirs as well. We don't think it's going to be blockchain based, but we'll see. And then we know Haiti is already naming and working on their project. But I've been on a mission to open the door and start talking about this stuff in Africa. South Africa was the only country when we first started talking about this that we're looking at CBDC. We've been really involved in, going in West Africa, going in East Africa, and really talk about the benefits and how this technology can be used and how the ecosystem is ready for it too. That's something, that's really unique about Africa, by the way, is the fact that the ecosystem can help drive an adoption model that is private, that is trusted, and integrating, and you're just changing the infrastructure at that layer and enabling the ecosystem and the fintechs to build on top of it. We think that can be very powerful in Africa.
Oh yeah, definitely. So that leads me to my last question for you here. In the next 20 years, the year 2040, do you see CBDCs being impacted or being used globally and impacting countries in Africa, in the Caribbean?
I sure hope so. Yes. I sure hope so. I mean, imagine cross-border payments, right? We were just working through a minimal use case that we were working on demoing for central banks, but just cross-border payments. Imagine that the U.S. has a digital dollar, and South Africa has the digital yuan, the digital rand. Sending money to South Africa can become very streamlined, where you use your app where you are, you send the money. South Africa, the Reserve Bank of South Africa most likely has a correspondent banking account or a reserve account with the US Fed. Imagine, and we know money never really moves, right? It's really debit and credit on one side. So imagine that you do the debit on one side on your wallet, and it goes to the Fed, to the digital dollar wallet for South Africa. And the South Africa Reserve Bank disburses to the person that you're saving into their CBDC. that can happen in 3 seconds. 3 seconds, right? Like
and
the whole
cheaper.
thing, like not even just, I mean, just what we're talking about here, this is not correspondent banking, you have to do this before 2 p.m. for it to be, and then you're going to have to wait 3 days for international payment. We're talking about international payment in 3 seconds with full settlement, end to end. And that's possible. And if you have CBDCs around the world, and hopefully we do, those are the things that are possible. So the cost of cross-border payment can go down, making it much easier for remittances. And you get into a different conversation around policy. That's something that's very interesting to us, because it's one thing to sell technology, but hopefully we technology that has an impact. Hopefully we sell technology that drive a change, or at least an innovation mindset when it comes to framework, when it comes to policy as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And looking forward to it. Looking forward to the future with CBDCs and of course the use case around the world. Thanks to Carmelle Cadet for coming onto the show. And that's it for Community Crypto. Every week, we're building a global community with local crypto groups. So be sure to tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern on CoinDesk TV. See you then.